you'll hear a lot of prosecutors say that it's easy to fake being mentally retarded, and that's simply not true. If you ask anybody, any educational psychologist or any person who deals with people with mental retardation, they will tell you that in order to credibly claim that you have mental retardation, you have to have really a history of low performance in intellectual, cognitive, academic stuff, plus inability to sort of take care of yourself in the world. And if those are things you can't fake, or at least you won't have been faking them for your entire life. Mental illness maybe is harder to detect when somebody is telling the truth about whether they are delusional or seriously mentally ill or not. And that's going to make it hard, I think, for us to push mental illness as a line for abolishing another group of, removing another group of offenders from the death-eligible pool. If we say, sure, no juveniles, sure, no people with mental retardation, but now we'd like to add to that the people who are mentally ill. There are a lot of people who are mentally ill who sort of get along in the world because their mental illness is episodic or it's chronic but not highly severe, and so that may be a tougher step to take. That said, the logic of the mental retardation and juvenile rulings really compels the conclusion that people who are suffering from serious mental illness lack the culpability to be sentenced to death. And so I think that just as a matter of legal reasoning, at least those of us in the legal community are going to continue to push this argument and hope that we can find a sympathetic ear somewhere to limit the reach of the death penalty. The other thing that complicates that possibility is that the law already, what the judges will tell you, is that the law already prohibits the execution of people who are mentally ill, as long as they are extremely, severely, presently mentally ill. And you really have to be, barking at the moon for them to think that you are sufficiently mentally ill not to qualify for the death penalty. The Scott Panetti case here in Texas got a lot of press during the last year. Scott was tried out in Kerrville several years ago and demanded the right to represent himself at trial, only to appear at court in a purple cowboy suit, having issued subpoenas for Jesus Christ and the Pope and a bunch of other people. He was plainly very ill and evidently should not have been allowed to represent himself. But the trial judge just let him go, and the record of that trial is tragic and shameful to read, because he was clearly out of his head throughout the entire proceeding. He's out of his head today. And yet, every court to consider that case has said he's sane enough to execute. So I think that until we have a rule of law that will keep people like Scott Panetti from being executed as sort of deluded instrument of their own execution, we will not be safe on the mental illness front. The last thing I want to just comment on momentarily is the lethal injection controversy. If you follow the papers, you have probably read or heard that the use of the sort of 3-drug cocktail, as it's called, in the process of lethal injection has come under legal attack in the last year. Basically, in 2005, February of 2005, a British medical journal called The Lancet published an article that suggested that the second of the 3 drugs that is administered in the Texas 3-drug sequence that is used in lethal injections may in fact cause great suffering and pain. And that triggered a lot of litigation, because almost every state in the country that uses lethal injection, and now that is almost every state, period, that has the death penalty, uses this same 3-drug combination. And so the litigation over that has been mixed. A federal judge in Missouri within the last week declared that Missouri's system was too fraught with risk of causing suffering, that they were going to, he's basically entered an order that says Missouri can't kill anybody else using this protocol until I'm satisfied that things have improved. They had a guy administering the drugs in Missouri who was like nearsighted. He couldn't read the labels of the chemicals, and he came to court and testified in this hearing that he didn't know what quantities of drugs he was supposed to administer, and sometimes they would give him guidelines and he would follow them or not according to whether he had enough drugs on hand on any particular day. So it's a shameful situation in Missouri, and you know it's no better anywhere else. You know it's not any better in Texas, where we're executing 4 people a month, than it is in some other places. So there are real questions about the fairness and safety of lethal injection. They're probably going to be answered in other places before they're answered here. I don't see Texas. We've been litigating this issue aggressively here. I worked on a case in June where our client was ultimately executed, and we had very good evidence on this subject, and we really thought we had a good chance of stopping it, and it just didn't happen. So I don't think it's going to happen here, but I would like to encourage everybody to not get too caught up in the lethal injection. It's a terrible thing to suggest, because if it is causing suffering, then we ought not to be doing it. We should figure out some other way if we're going to have executions. But I think the problem is it's really easily fixed. If you talk to any of the doctors who study this stuff, they'll tell you that all you have to do is give a massive overdose of the fast-acting barbiturate, which is the first drug that's administered. That'll kill you, and they'll do it painlessly. It just takes a lot longer. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes. And most of these people have said that, most of the states that adopted the so-called 3-drug cocktail did so because they wanted something that would purport to kill you in 10 to 12 minutes. Because the discomfort and embarrassment of standing around uncomfortably, coughing and shuffling your feet for 20 to 30 minutes while waiting for someone to die really brings home sort of barbaric quality of what's going on and the surreal nature of the fact that you're putting somebody to death while people are just standing around not doing anything about it. So the longer that takes, the more uncomfortable the system is with it. But at the same time, the lethal injection controversy, I think, is a short-lived one, and it will be resolved in favor of continuing to use lethal injection with some slightly different combination of chemicals. So we shouldn't focus too much of our energy on that as organizers or activists, I think. Those are the points I wanted to mention, and I'm happy when we get to the Q&A to talk about other things that people are